Well, good afternoon. My name is Deb Seminary. I'm the Executive Director of DisruptWell Summit. And yesterday I got a call that our AT&T presenter is not going to be able to make it today, which is very disappointing. I was looking forward to hearing from her. So we get the pleasure of hearing from Seth Arndorfer, who is the CEO of Dakota Carrier Network. And then Seth and I are going to have a little discussion about 5G, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. Thank you, Seth, for joining us today.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you, Deb. My name is Seth Arndorfer. I'm the CEO of DCN, or Dakota Carrier Network. And DCN, we are a fiber-based broadband technology company that serves businesses, governmental entities, and also we provide internet for state government and our owner companies, the rural broadband service providers across the state. And you might be asking yourself, why would we have a fiber company that's 100% wired up here talking about 5G? And I'll start with a quote from Henry David Thoreau that says, sometimes it's what we don't see that really matters. And that's really important, I think, for today's discussion on 5G, that as users of technology, we don't live in a wired world. This mic isn't wired. You know, 50 years ago, I'd be standing here with a wired mic. My cell phone isn't wired. We're going to be talking, all the things we talked about today, or the speakers that we had today, we're talking about AI and IoT and precision ag and all these other advancements and emerging technologies. And they never talk about wires. And so I'm going to first spend the first portion of our time this afternoon talking about the relationship between our wired infrastructure that we have as service providers and the evolving technology that you all use as end users. And so hopefully it gives a little perspective. I mean, we had talked about brain surgery today. We talked about blockchain today. I'm gonna try to make it real simple, so it's in a way that we can all kind of walk away and understand. And I really enjoyed and appreciated hearing from our speakers today. And I think the lineup has been great so far, and hopefully I have a little bit to add to it. So I'll start out with what we expect. If you go home tonight and you turn on the kitchen sink, how often do you wonder if water is going to come out of that spigot? Your kids probably have never even dealt with not having water. We just expect it to be there every time and anytime. Anytime we go to the restroom, anytime we go anywhere, we just expect water to come out of that tap. And that's really where we've come to be from a technology standpoint. My kids, regardless, I'm a small town farm kid from Hettinger, North Dakota. And as we're traveling to Hettinger, going down the interstate, they expect their experience to be exactly the same, whether we're halfway between New Salem and Richardson, as it is when we're in our house. That's really what we're striving to get to as service providers. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the role that DCN plays in that, and the role kind of as I see our technology evolve across North Dakota. From a wireless perspective, we started out with, the first cell phones came out. I started my career in 1997 at Consolidated Telephone Cooperative in Dickinson, North Dakota. And the first job that I got was selling a cell phone to area farmers and ranchers. On my family farm, we used just CB radios. We didn't even have licensed radios. We used CB radios that Grandpa put a large antenna up at the hill right next to our house, and we could reach the majority of our land with that CB radio. But when cell phones came out, it truly changed our ability to communicate. And it did for a lot of farmers and ranchers that I had the opportunity to sell their first cell phones to. And then we started, text messaging and using the internet. And we got to where we are today, and think about how much our lives have changed just in the last 7 years. with the internet. And I won't say exactly 7. That might be off. But when the iPhone came out, it was a disruptive technology. We talk about disruptive technologies, and that really was one of them. Now, everything that we do on these cell phones. Whether it's our banking, we talked about using our cell phones to monitor our hearts earlier today. It's just truly, if you aren't interacting with your customer and giving them a route to you via their cell phone, you're probably missing an opportunity. And now we hear a lot in the marketplace about 5G. Oh, what's 5G going to do? It's going to change everything, and I believe that it will. I think that politically there have been some setbacks for the deployment of 5G in the United States with Huawei and the Chinese government. Some of the things that we talk about, bad doers and people with malicious intentions, they can be individuals, but they can also be countries. And I think that's really playing into the deployment and the speed of deployment of 5G in the U.S. Okay, so I am going to walk you through how we would make a phone call from myself to Deb's seminary. And a lot of people think that when I call Deb, that it goes from my phone to Deb's phone and it's wireless. Well, in reality, I'm not going to use Okay, too many things in my hand. Okay, in reality, there's a cell phone tower right across the street over here on Divide, right behind the Senate. So as you guys leave, you'll see that's called a macro cell site. And it goes from my cell phone on a wireless signal to that tower, and then it hits a DCN fiber, and then it carries up to the DCN building on 43rd, and we carry that signal to Minneapolis, to the Verizon switch. And the Verizon switch says, well, where is Deb at? And in less than 50 milliseconds, or faster than you can blink your eye, that switch knows that Deb is actually connected to the same cell site. It routes it back on a DCN fiber from Minneapolis to our building on 43rd, down to Century, to that tower, and Deb's phone rings. And even as we're talking, our conversation doesn't go wirelessly to each other. It runs to that cell site. It runs on a DCN fiber to Minneapolis and back to Deb all the time that we're on the phone. The same thing goes for web browsing, Netflix streaming. None of that really, as wireless evolves and as the speeds continue to evolve, we need to be closer to that signal. Think about Wi-Fi. You get a better experience if you're in the room that the Wi-Fi antenna is in, right? Well, the same thing goes for cellular data. Well, across the state of North Dakota, and my kids with their expectations, we're getting closer to meeting that than we were 5 years ago, 3 years ago, or especially 10 years ago. But this slide depicts how many towers that DCN has fiber infrastructure to across the state of North Dakota. The FCC Commissioner Ajit Pai was in Bismarck yesterday. We had a great conversation talking about closing the digital divide, not only from a wired infrastructure, but also from a wireless infrastructure perspective. And North Dakota, I'm proud to say, is leading the country in connectivity. Across the state of North Dakota, we have over 294 communities that have the ability, if you're a resident in one of those communities and you call your service provider, whether it's one of my rural cooperative owners like Consolidated Telephone or Beck Communication or West River Telephone, you call them and you want gigabit access to your home, you can get it. That's unprecedented. Shawn Riley is going to talk about some of the innovation that the North Dakota state government is undertaking. And that is able, or they are able to take on those initiatives because of the investment we've made in bringing gigabit service to every K-12 school in the state. Every K-12 school in the state. So out in Fairfield, North Dakota, in any small K-12 school, we have fiber there, and the kids there have the same access to an educational experience as a student living in Bismarck or Fargo, North Dakota. Back to the wireless piece. I'm going to go back to the macro cell site. So I want to talk about the difference between coverage So coverage, we want to have coverage across the state of North Dakota. Are we seriously down to 30 seconds left? Oh. I was going to be an auctioneer. That was going to be my second line. I was going to give you a run at it. Okay. Coverage. We need towers across the state of North Dakota. But I want to talk about capacity. If you've ever been to, and no offense to BSC, but I went to an NDSU tailgating party, and there was 30,000 people standing around. I had 4 bars of service on my phone, and I could not get anything to work on my phone. That is a capacity issue. Too many people were connected to that macro cell site. So what is 5G going to do for us? The service providers are working with fiber providers like DCN, like Midco, to deploy small cells. And we actually have deployed, as DCN, in coordination with the wireless providers, small cells on BSC's campus. So when you leave the campus, you look out, it looks like a street light, but it's actually a small cell tower. And we have many of these across the campus at BSC. We have them deployed across the campus at NDSU, at UND, where we have large congregations of population using their mobile devices for personal and business use. As we look forward to the deployment of 5G, it's going to be relying on these small cell towers. The downside of small cell technology is that it only reaches, instead of that macro cell site by Cenex that could reach up to 15 miles, these have a 500-foot one way and 500-foot, so you have a 1,000-foot circle that they can cover. That will work fine in a Bismarck and a Fargo and a campus environment, but when we talk about precision ag technologies, we're going to have to continue to watch that and see how that evolves so that we can have ubiquitous coverage or seamless coverage on every acre across the state of North Dakota. The FCC just recently announced that they're going to be opening up more spectrum for sale so that we can then, as service providers, use that spectrum to increase the coverage and the capacity across the state of North Dakota. As a farm kid, I'm really drawn to precision ag and the efficiencies that technology can bring to farmers. And there's the debate of, okay, if we have an autonomous farm, well, what are we going to do with all the people that we had working on the farm before? But the reality is, just like on my family farm, I chose to go in a different direction, as did my brothers. There are less people willing to work and live in those very rural areas. And that's why the deployment of technology is so critical. And so DCN was yesterday at the Grand Farm Initiative, where in North Dakota, just south of Fargo, Emerging Prairie is a group of leaders that are going to, their intention is to have 100% autonomous farm, one of the first in the country. We're really excited to be a part of that. So that's why I was asked to be on the panel to give you some perspective of what we don't see sometimes matters the most. And I can tell you that we are going to continue to invest in infrastructure, in fiber infrastructure and wireless infrastructure. They both have to be here equally in order for us all to take advantage of some of the new disruptive technologies and concepts that we talked about earlier today, and we'll hear about more this afternoon. So with that, Deb, we'll open it up for some questions.
Well, first of all, I'm going to ask you a couple. I've been reading since I decided to moderate this panel, and one of the things that I read, and I'm sure it's true because everything you read is true, right? Is not all 5G offerings are the same. So as you mentioned, your offering, Midco's offering, AT&T's offering, Verizon's offering. Is that a fact?
Well, I think we need to back up a little bit. There are no 5G offerings in the state of North Dakota, number one. So DCN doesn't have a 5G offering. Midco doesn't have a 5G offering. I would ask AT&T if they had a 5G offering in North Dakota. I would question its validity. I think 5G, when we talk, the speaker earlier this afternoon had the curve of innovation and technology, and I think we're just on the very first part of that upward curve. We haven't seen it fully deployed in the United States except for in small pockets. But no, I would say all 5G likely is not, it's going to be a little bit different, but we just truly haven't experienced it in North Dakota yet.
So if someone wants, let's say, if they decide they're going to put some 5G at NDSU campus or at BSC or any of the other campuses or larger metropolitan areas, first of all, if you buy a 5G phone, will it work in all of those places?
It will, because they're backward compatible. And just like when you travel North Dakota, we're blessed to have 4G capabilities across most of the state. But if you go to Montana or Wyoming, you'll find stretches of miles of those states that are still, it goes down to the 1X data, because these phones have to be backward compatible, and they still are. And the small cells that I showed in that picture that are deployed on BSC's and NDSU and UND's campus, they're still transmitting a 4G signal, but they're equipped and ready to be upgraded when some of these issues are worked out with some of the components that are inside those antennas to support and provide 5G.
Okay. And yeah, it was interesting because we were at a place 5 miles outside of Madison, Wisconsin this weekend in 3G, and my phone would not do anything. It was very frustrating. And then, so the second part of that question is, are those the areas that will see the service first? Or is there a criteria? Is there policy that needs to be done by policymakers in certain metropolitan areas? What needs to be done to get the 5G?
That's a great question. I think it's twofold. I think one is the ROI, or the demand results. These wireless carriers that we work with they create what they call heat maps. And what a heat map is if you think of all of you, if you all jumped on your phone right now and started doing something, it would create a large amount of data being consumed at BSC, and they'd say, man, this is happening on a continual basis, and these people are starting to suffer. Their experience on their devices are starting to suffer. So that's really the first trigger of a service provider investing in 5G. The second one is the political side of it. The city of Bismarck, we've worked with the city of Bismarck to make sure that the policies are in place so that as we want to deploy the technology, that these municipalities are embracing it and supporting of it. Because if they were, for example, to charge us an exorbitant amount of money to put fiber in the ground, or exuberant or outrageous pole attachment fees to hang that antenna, that business case isn't going to be able to be supported by the service provider, and the investment won't be made. And then the economic impact for the community is you don't have access to deploy some of these new technologies as a business, and then the whole community suffers. So I think we as citizens want to encourage our policymakers to make sure that we are creating policy that really not only doesn't prohibit, but encourages the investment in technology.
Sure, because that businesses are going to look at that in the future and say, well, they don't have the capabilities. Why would I want to locate there? Correct?
That's right. If we're trying to attract new businesses into North Dakota to invest in North Dakota, that's one of the first things that they're going to ask is, what's your connectivity situation? How many options do I have? Do I only have one choice? We are for competition. We support competition. We have a healthy competition with our cable company friends, and we truly need continued investment by both.
Okay. We have a question.
Thank you, Seth. I'm glad you explained that this isn't all magic fairy dust when this all happens. So, so I'm going to take a little different path to you, I guess. You know, there's a big race on right now, what I call drones in space. And, SpaceX, OneWeb, I should say, they're racing to put a bunch of low orbit satellites in to provide internet access and potentially calling access as well. what are your thoughts on that? And then also, when that gets deployed, are they basically relays that are going to come to like a satellite with DCN that then will, just like what you're doing with the towers right now?
Great question. So one thing that I've learned in my 20 plus years in the industry is there's not a one size fits all for communications. I think that low orbit satellite has some advantages that it will bring. I think the challenges that it will bring is the same as satellite has today, even though it's going to be improved. When you think of a traditional satellite being up in outer space, there's a latency, which latency is going to be, my kids, or let me back it up. 30 years ago, I didn't know what a gigabit was. My kids all know how many gigs we can consume in a month. Latency is going to be that next term that we all become very, very aware of. And that's the time that it takes for a bit or a piece of data in a blockchain or anything to get from myself to you and back to me. And some of these technologies, nothing today travels faster than the speed of light. So fiber is king, but it doesn't have a mobility component. So as we look at low orbit satellite, it's going to have ubiquitous coverage because they have the ability to do that, but they have some line of sight issues. You have to be able to see the satellite in order for it to work really well, unless you have some sort of an exterior mounted antenna. And so the practicality of it kind of has some issues that are going to have to be worked out. We are watching it closely as DCN. If at some point in the future, maybe it's not in my career, but maybe it'll be in my kids' career, there will be a disruptive technology that changes everything, just like the internet changed our lives. But low orbit satellite may be one of them, but I think there are some challenges that it faces. As far as the downlink of that traffic, yes, that's exactly how it works. The traffic will, as I kind of went through that cell phone call, how it's going to work is it's going to go from your cell phone to that low orbit satellite, and from that low orbit satellite, it'll go to some sort of an aggregation point, maybe at a DCN data center here in Bismarck or a data center in Fargo, and then that's where it jumps on the fiber network, and then we carry it to, if you're going to go to Netflix and Google, Facebook, they have all contacted DCN to reduce the amount of latency for their users, so that when you go to Netflix and you wonder, I wonder where this movie's actually, where is the cloud? It's the entire Netflix library is residing right now, a copy of it, in our data center in Bismarck, and we have another copy in Fargo. And what that means to you is an improved experience, ultra high def 4K content, reduced latency for your movie to come up. That's why we have these data centers in the state.
And now we all know something about Netflix that our kids don't. Thank you. That's so awesome. Are there any other questions? Because I have another one. Are they called cells that will be installed?
The small cells on the streets? Yep.
Yes, okay.
Yep.
How large are those, and is there a workforce development component of that? Will we need to hire more people to make them? And
sure. Can we pull that slide back up? Okay, so this is a picture of a small cell. And when DCN negotiates the contracts with the wireless providers to deploy small cells, they do it in a couple different ways, but generally it's done with a local contractor. Master Construction or Rhino, or you'll see as you drive around town right now on State Street, you can see fiber being installed. That's being done right now by one of our owner companies, Beck Communications. And those contractors will then work with the jurisdictions to get approval to take down the existing street light, to replace it, to bring power to it, and to bring fiber to it. That all will require labor. It's very labor intensive. So from that aspect, yes, there's job creation. But I think the real, when we talk about scale and the job creation that 5G will bring, I don't think it's so much on the deployment of 5G. I think it'll be more on the availability of the capacity that 5G will, all these new applications and new products and services that will be able to be deployed in the Bismarcks, the Fargos, and the Grand Forks, and hopefully eventually the rural areas in North Dakota. That's where I think the real job creation is going to be driven by 5G.
And I think that's a great note to end on because, oh, sorry, Blake?
Great question. So we have installed small cell sites with the ability to co-locate, meaning more than one tenant, more than one carrier. Verizon, T-Mobile, AT&T could each have a small, they could have an antenna, but there are some interference issues that have come up when we try to co-locate. So each carrier could require I'm going to call it a light pole.
Okay, we have time for one short question.
That was just nasty. Seth, thank you so much. So the infrastructure required for fully reliable 5G in the state of North Dakota is significant. Let's just say it's $200 million. And that's probably close, I don't know. And it might take 3, 4, 5 years to put that in place. If there were a way for the providers to go to a source that has that money and could loan it to them, figuratively speaking, to get it done sooner than later, is there merit to that because of the level of competitive nature that North Dakota rises to as a result of that?
Absolutely. Great observation. There are programs. The USDA has a program federally that most of our owners participate in that help offset some of the high-cost areas across North Dakota. And they've invested over $1.3 billion in fiber, and the federal government has helped to offset some of those costs. From the FCC standpoint, Commissioner Pai was out yesterday, and they have the Connect America Fund, of which North Dakota Midco was a recipient, and as was Beck Communications to connect some areas across the river in southern Mandan. Now, as we look forward, yes, we're going to continue to work with the federal government to make sure that those funds are available and that we're competing to get as many of those funds as possible. But at a statewide level, some other states have actually created a fund to do just what you're talking about and say, okay, we want to be ahead competitively, even from a campus perspective. The presidents at each of the universities that I said we had small cells deployed at, they realized that in order for them to compete for the kids, they need to have the same technology. As employers and as community leaders, we need to take that same position and make sure that we have the most up-to-date technology in our communities across North Dakota. And I'm not just talking Bismarck or Fargo, I'm talking every community, including Hettinger. And we can do that on a statewide basis.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Seth. Appreciate it.
That was really interesting. I don't know about you, but I'm going to be walking around looking for small cell sites everywhere I go. Hey, Alexa, can you tell us about our next speaker, please?
Hello. Cybersecurity can certainly make one think of major disruption. Our next speaker is at the center of statewide efforts to lead the nation in cybersecurity education and training. It's my pleasure to introduce Shawn Riley, Chief Information Officer for the state of North Dakota.
That is officially the first time I've ever been introduced by an AI, and I kind of like it. So that's going to be cool. You guys have heard about a ton of really cool technologies today, right? The future is amazing. What I have to talk about, though, is some of the pain point, right? The world is going to change more in the next 5 to 10 years than it's changed in the last 40. The world is going to look immensely different, and every single day is going to go by, and we are just going to feel slightly different, a little different, a little different, and then we look back and we go, holy crap, we used to do it that way? Really? I have a compound problem. I have to deploy these technologies across the state. I help to make all sorts of things happen. My day title is Chief Information Officer, Cabinet to Governor Burgum, etc. But my real title is Chief Troublemaker. My job is to create havoc and get things done all around the state with technology. And one of the biggest issues that we have today comes in the form of cybersecurity. So let's start with the challenge. Is anybody in here, do you know that you have had data stolen in the last 5 years? Go ahead, raise your hand. Okay, that's a lot of hands, right, of people who know they've had data stolen. How many of you don't really know, but probably have had data stolen in the last 5 years? Okay, so I will go the other way and I will say, raise your hand if you think you have not had any personal information stolen in the last 5 years. Nobody's brave enough to raise their hand, and that's probably a good thing because, okay, all right, somebody always raises their hand just to spite me, but I will almost guarantee if I go and take a look, 100% of adults in the United States have had personally identifiable information or higher classified data stolen over the last 5 years. 100%. That is not acceptable. Right? Absolutely not acceptable. And that is the challenge of our time today. The reality is that cybersecurity is the one common link that all these technologies this morning had, and all these technologies we've talked about. There is someone somewhere in the world trying to hack every single one of those technologies right now. They're trying to be able to find a way, whether it be a blockchain, or whether it be 5G or everything else, trying to find a way to be able to gain an advantage, to be able to steal data, to make themselves money. The reality is, as far as the state of North Dakota goes, right now, just right now, in the time that I'm talking, over this 15 minutes, we'll have something in the neighborhood of 50,000 attacks against the state of North Dakota. Just what's under my personal purview, not companies, just under the state government. This month, we will have in the neighborhood of 6 million attacks against our front door. Our comprehensive attacks for the year will be in the neighborhood of 140 million attacks. That's just against the itty-bitty little government of North Dakota, right? This is a massive problem. So when we think about the future, I'm going to tell you a little story here, and I want to ask you a question. So let me ask you, how many of you can give me a job, just yell it out, give me a job that doesn't use computer technology today? Shout it out. Everybody laughs, right? On occasion, right, I did this in a room of 7,000 people back in Toronto back in August, and one person was really brave, and they were sitting in this general direction and said, professional golfer. Right? I'm like, oh, crap, I don't golf. I can't think of it. And the room came undone. What are you talking about? I got an app on my cell phone that measures my backswing. I got a laser on my club, right? I mean, people just came undone, right? The only job that we've come up so far is professional historical reenactor. And that person even came forward and said, yeah, but I use websites to schedule all my stuff. So we live in a world where every single one of us is interacting with technology on a constant basis. Now, I want you to take a look at these two young ladies here. These two girls at the time of this photo were second graders here in Bismarck. They go to Liberty Elementary. And these girls are part of a classroom that has robotics. And I'll give you a quick story. The girl on the left, she's holding the sign there, please stop. So at the time, this girl is about this big around, right? She's barely this tall. I walk in the front of the school, and this girl runs up down the hallway and goes, stop, don't move. I'm like, geez, scary little kid. All right. Behind her the robot that the girl on the right is holding. It's an Ozobot, Dashbot. The little robot drives along the floor, it stops, it turns right towards me, it drives up to me, and the head of the thing looks up at me and says, "Please take your message." And in the back is that little Lego box that they built there, and there's the message in it, and I pull out the message and I undo it, and it's a welcome to the classroom. And I walk in their classroom, and what do I find? I find 25 kids, boys and girls, who have Ozobots, who have Dashbots, who have codeforkids.org, who are learning technology that is, frankly, scary to a lot of us adults as second graders, right? These kids are going to be working on things and inventing things we haven't even thought of yet. That's their future. And yet, what do we have to worry about right now? Quite frankly, right now, I have to worry about whether a foreign government takes over that robot to try to get to the school system to be able to try and pivot then to the National Guard, which happens to be defending a nuclear missile site in Minot. That's the scenario that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis right now. So, the problem is immense. What are we going to do about it? How are we going to disrupt it? How do we change this workforce aspect? How many jobs are open in cybersecurity today, right now, in the United States? About 480,000. What is the unemployment rate in cybersecurity today? 0. If you are an employable individual, you can get a job in cybersecurity today. What's the average salary of a cybersecurity person? $116,000. How many of you need some cyber people? Yeah. So when we look at the state as a whole, we thought there's got to be a better way. There's got to be a way to manage the workforce. There's got to be a way to protect these kids. And there's got to be a way to really help the rest of the nation in this problem. So what's the disruptive response? Believe it or not, it came from government. How often does that happen? Right? The disruptive innovation centered right here in Bismarck, the state of North Dakota. The state of North Dakota said, we are going to change the conversation around cybersecurity. Why in government? Why does it need to start here? Right? Private industry has a ton of bright minds, way better salaries, right? Why does it need to start in government? If you go and do your business at Walmart, and Walmart loses your data, what do? Screw you, I'm going to Target. Target loses your data. What do? I'm going to Amazon. Amazon loses your data. You go somewhere else, right? You have a choice as a consumer. As a citizen holding your own information, you get to decide where you go. What happens when a state loses your data? You're stuck with them. You're absolutely stuck with them. We in government have a moral responsibility, a moral obligation to keep your private information safe in ways that any private sector organization doesn't have. We hold practically everything about everybody from a data standpoint. We absolutely must keep it safe. So we decided to make this change here within the state. So let's talk about outcomes. I like to just burn into outcomes really fast. Every student, every school, cyber educated, kindergarten through a PhD. This is not tomorrow, this is done. The state of North Dakota stepped forward as the first and only state in the union to be able to say that we are going to have every single student in this state computer science educated and cyber science educated, kindergarten through PhD. BSc was one of the cornerstones for us to be able to get this moving in the university system. Our K-12 environment had a whole ton of schools raise their hand and say, absolutely, let's be in. In 11 months' time, we created a brand new standard for computer science, a brand new standard for cyber science. We integrated those two standards together. We educated over 1,500 teachers, and we've made these classes available in every single school district in the state. Hey, private sector guys, why are you going so damn slow? This is the kind of outcome that is going to actually change things going forward. So what does this do for you? This gives you about 120,000 kids at any point that have cyber education. Do I expect them all to become cyber analysts? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I expect them to become lawyers and doctors and biological scientists and engineers and hell, even work at Applebee's, right? Whatever it may be. But whatever they're doing, they understand the risk of the technology, they understand the impacts of the technology, and they understand that their world is immersed in technology. And while we can absolutely leverage it to do awesome things, we also have to protect ourselves. From a business standpoint, what's the average cost of a cybersecurity incident? Anybody? 11 grand. 11 grand per incident is the average cost. What's the average cost of a breach? $4 million is the average breach cost. If your workforce knows not to click the phishing emails, what does that do for your average company? It lowers my overall cost of cybersecurity defense. It lowers my cost of downtime. It increases the knowledge set of my overall staff. It gives me a huge competitive advantage. I have already been talking to companies who put their hand up and said, how can I move offices to North Dakota because we're sick and tired of dealing with this crap. Huge, huge opportunity for business. The reality is it comes down to tomorrow, these kids. So this young lass, she's also from that same class in Liberty Elementary. She's got a little different robot there. Her robot, she takes markers and she's doing programming using colors. Doesn't work for me, I'm colorblind, sorry. But for these kids, it's great, right? She's able to make it turn left and turn right and flash and vibrate and jiggle and all these different things, all based on this. This second grade kid seeing this. And as I'm talking to her, right, I'm asking her a question. I said, so what happens if little Joey, who is to her left, grabs her markers and starts writing on your paper? Right? She grabs the paper. No, he can't. Like, good, you've got physical security down. Good job. These kids are going to design and develop things that we haven't thought of yet. We have to provide them this capacity. So the state of North Dakota is leading the way, but we do not expect to solve the world's problems by ourselves. We have offered our knowledge set, we've offered our standards, our education standards, as open standards to any state that wants them. We're currently working with several other states. If they want to adopt it, please adopt it. The reality is that we may be leading the way, but we can't solve everything by ourselves. So it's a huge challenge. It's a huge capability. I'll leave you with just a thought around this. How many of you knew before I started this conversation that you were being attacked while you were sitting here? A handful of people, right? Why should you have to be? Right? Why should we have to worry about this? Why should that second grade class have to sit here and worry about whether or not their computer or their robot is going to get taken over by some other country trying to use it to get to nuclear missiles? They absolutely shouldn't. This is why we have undertaken this project, and this is how we have disrupted workforce here in the state of North Dakota. Thank you.
Does anyone have questions for Shawn? You covered it so well, we just don't even know. I would like to share with you at least two of the panelists that were on the Women in STEM panel served on the review committee for those computer standards. So Courtney Stoltz from Gateway to Science and Bethlehem Groneberg was both of them served on the reviews committee for those. So we've got some good people here with us today.
And I will add, just as a total aside on this whole thing, this whole K-20 concept and the capabilities came from my daughter, who was at the time 14, hands on her hips, looking like Peter Pan, looking at me and going, "Dad, where's all my tech classes?"
That's right.
Why not?
Why not?
Let's go do it.
Why not?
Yeah.
Yeah, and at Gateway to Science, we're starting, I know the standard is K through 20. We're teaching them at preschool.
We're going to get to the P.
Ready. They got to be ready by the time they get to K.
I have a question. How small should a business be, or how large should a business be, I guess, before they consider hiring someone for cybersecurity? If you're just a mom and pop shop, if you're a grocery store, if you're...
Let me ask you this. I would say it a little differently. Rather than size, I would say, are your computers important to you? If you're a company of 2 people and you can't operate without your computers, then you need some help. And whether or not you have a full-time FTE as cybersecurity, probably unlikely if you're a company of 2 people. But can you find some help out there through other organizations? Absolutely.
If I could, just a quick plug for our 1 Million Cups chapter here in Bismarck, Mandan. We do have a cybersecurity panel coming up October 16th, Wednesday morning, October 16th, 9 a.m. at Dakota Stage. It'll be some of those slow-moving private sector cybersecurity guys that'll be on that panel, but a little different perspective. Shawn did a really good job, but there'll be more knowledge there.
Shawn, thank you for sharing your time with us today. So for the slow-moving private sector,
That's going to catch on, guys.
I loved it. And particularly those that might be slow to have taken any steps for cybersecurity. What are the 1 or 2 things that they should do immediately, in your opinion?
So the first thing is understand where your risks are. So with any organization, you have a different platform of risk. And it may be that your company serves a whole ton of cafeteria menus and it's all public information, and you don't have private information. That may happen. Most companies, though, don't have just that simplistic aspect. You have to understand, what is your risk? Do you process credit card information? Do you hold personally identifiable information? Do you work with other companies that have private information? Those are the kind of things. So the first thing is understand your risk. The second side is simply, you need to make sure that you acknowledge this is a problem. Because most people really don't have any idea how big of an issue this is. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many people look at me and say, "Oh, but we're North Dakota, we're a family state. Who'd ever want to bother us?" And then I look around and go, okay, we are the 2nd largest energy producer in the country. We have the largest drone test site in the country. We have immense drone research. We happen to have the only nuclear base with nuclear missiles and B-52 strategic bombers. Anybody think that any other country might be interested in those 3 things? Right? And people just don't think of it, right? They just don't have exposure to it. So first, know what your assets are, right? So you know what you need to defend. And second, acknowledge the problem. From there, then you can start figuring out how to defend yourself.
So what can we expect with the implementation of distributed ledger and blockchain technology in regards to the state's cybersecurity efforts?
Yeah, so distributed ledger technologies have a ton of very positive capabilities when it comes to cybersecurity. Now, distributed ledger, from some aspects, we can make very, very public data continue to be public and can lock it in, and it's excellent for cybersecurity. So think of land deeds, right? This is a major thing here. So we have a $5 billion mineral rights reserve here in the state of North Dakota. That mineral rights reserve goes back to when the state was a territory, and all of that data has to be kept in an immutable fashion. That is a huge, huge thing for us, that we are very, very interested in a blockchain system, and we're actually already in process of a blockchain system for that particular function. A lot of other functions where there could be some great leveraging. How many of you would like to vote from your phone, right? Yeah, a lot of people, right? How many of you would never like to stand in line again ever at any government anywhere? Yeah, right? The reality is blockchain can help us with that in a lot of ways. There are some other aspects, though, from a private side of information that we have to consider that can blockchain be very helpful for? Yes, but we have to implement it considerably different than you would see in other environments. Tax records as an example. We would love to have that on a blockchain, but that has to be a private blockchain that only has authorized accessibility. So in those cases, cybersecurity drives us towards an immutable technology. So there's a great advantage there, but the implementation of it is a little more varied and nuanced than you would expect because of the completely different data types that we have to manage.
Shawn, I'm just going to put in a shameless plug. On October 2nd and 3rd, we'll be hosting CyberCon 2019, second annual. It'll be in the same room, so if you're interested, please join us for CyberCon 2019 to learn about critical infrastructure and cybersecurity.
And I think I'm speaking at that too, so there we go.
Shawn, during the legislative session, you and your team hosted what I kind of thought of as a war room event that was open to really anybody who was in the Capitol. I know our legislators took that in, and it was a very eye-opening experience for state government employees, the members of the legislature, to see where the threats were coming from and what types of threats were happening really live as we were in the room. And so could you talk a little bit about where threats are typically coming from now? I'm picturing that big map of the world on the wall that you had. And then also, would that type of experience be open? Would the state be able to host that kind of event, hold that kind of, make that kind of resource available to anybody who wanted to get a better understanding of these types of threats?
Yeah, absolutely. So Karen's mentioning a two-day session that we did for the legislature this last session. And what we did is we opened up a couple of rooms where we set up pods of hackers. And our hackers' purpose was to scare the pants off of people, frankly, which doesn't take that much effort. So, we hand them a USB key, say, here, plug this into your laptop in 30 seconds, well, more like 15 seconds. We own their laptop. We pop up a menu that says, ha, 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 we own you. The only thing you can do is cry and call the IT department. And then we use their webcam, take a picture of them as they're reading it, so it makes them... Yeah, and it's really fun to see senators and House representatives looking at themselves going, oh my God. Yeah, we did that. We also did some Wi-Fi spoofing. So we would act as another Wi-Fi system so that when you connected to what you thought was a good Wi-Fi, it was actually my Wi-Fi. And we would take those over and we would be able to leach data. We also spoofed a couple of sites here within the state's primary systems, PeopleSoft and et cetera. But the one that Karen's specifically asking to, the big screens that we have in here, we had big maps of the world, and you could see the active inbound attacks. And I think day one, actually, vast majority of our attacks were from Canada. No offense, Canadians. But the vast majority of our attacks that particular day were actually from Canada, and they were coming from a system that had been taken over by another nation, and they were using that to come after us. And we were able to show that, what type of attack, where they were coming from, how it was moving. And then we went through the list, and you could see basically every country on the planet has inbound, outbound attacks in huge, huge, huge volumes. And whether the typical actors of the Irans and Iraqs versus actors you wouldn't think of Canada, France, Germany, etc. It's not necessarily sponsored by any nation, but it shows people in those nations using those systems to be able to come after us.
All right, we have time for one more question if there is one more out there. Does not look like, oh, yeah. Okay.
So the short term, The short term of this is that it gets worse. Right now, so as I said, there's 480,000 jobs open in the cybersecurity space today. Over the next 4 years, that number is massively upswinging to in the neighborhood of 2.2 million jobs just in this one industry. So it's getting vastly worse in the short term. However, that kindergarten kid, that second grader who's learning 5, 8, 10 years from now comes out with a knowledge set that is considerably different. Here in the state of North Dakota, you'll see appreciable upswings. Other states that are going to follow our lead will have appreciable upswings. What we really have to get down to is, as much as anything, in the 18th century, everybody knew that you don't start a fire in the hay bale in the middle of the barn, right? They just knew that. That's stupid, right? Why would you do that? Blah, 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 blah. Well, today it's, hey, if the email doesn't speak the same language you speak and has a bunch of links in it, you don't click it, right? It's kind of the same deal, but to be honest, right, nobody has that experience in the general sense today, right? We haven't grown up with it as a culture over time. And so as we grow up over time, this will become a more muted problem.
Right. Thank you,
All right.
Shawn.
Thank you.
This is very interesting.
My name is Mike Beck. I worked in the field of vision rehabilitation for over 3 decades. One of my responsibilities was to assist visually impaired and handicapped individuals adapt their environments so they could live independently. I saw the struggles they were having manipulating medication and supplement bottles and reading labels. They were spilling contents of those traditional shaped bottles all over. There had to be a better way. I've been mulling over the idea of a simpler medication or supplement container for quite some time. Several years ago, I teamed up with a product development company, and the Simplicity bottle was born. I subsequently obtained a provisional patent. The number of individuals who might benefit from this simple bottle is astounding. According to data from the 2017 National Health Interview Survey, over 26 million American adults age 18 and older reported experiencing vision loss. The term vision loss refers to individuals who reported that they were having trouble seeing, even when wearing glasses or contact lenses, as well as to individuals who reported that they are blind or unable to see at all. So how does this simple bottle work? Its flat surfaces, 2 sides, 2 ends, bottom and top, allow for large print labels. Flat surfaces are easier to read with a magnifier than a curved surface. The Simplicity will not roll away if tipped or dropped. The cap is easy to open and close. It opens with a quarter turn and snaps back into place. It's helpful for those who may have limited use of their hands. A flow restriction ring, sized to the pill, minimizes spillage should the bottle tip over or be dropped. The ring also inhibits the number of pills which come out of the bottle, diminishing uncontrolled spilling. The design of the bottle easily accommodates the integration of audio devices, RFID devices, and technology of the future. Before I go, I want to tell you about an advertisement for a brand name over-the-counter product. The man in that commercial has the use of only one arm and is given a round bottle with a traditional cap. How might he get it open, let alone get his medication without spilling? He won't. However, he could if it was the Simplicity. We all know someone who struggles using traditional bottles with traditional shapes and labels. Take a moment, think about it. Who are they?